The British had designated May 15th as the last day of the Mandate, the last day that any British troops would remain within the Mandate's boundaries. The Arab states surrounding the Mandate vowed to attack if the Jews declared a state. Much of the world, including the United States Secretary of State George Marshall, urged the Jewish government led by David Ben Gurion not to declare a state, warning that a much larger Arab army would defeat it. Ben Gurion was convinced that this was a moment in history that could not be missed, and he convinced the Zionist executive to declare independence on the afternoon of the 14th, the 15th being Saturday. The ceremony was to take place at the hall of the Israel Museum on Rothchild Street in Tel Aviv. The hall was packed. In the front row sat the members of the Zionist executive. All were there except Chaim Weizmann. At 4 p.m., everyone rose to sing Hatikva. Then Ben Gurion began reading from the hastily drafted Declaration of Independence.
אנו חברי מועצת העם, נציגי היישוב העברי והתנועה הציונית, ביום סיום המנדט הבריטי על ארץ ישראל. ותוקף זכותנו הטבעית וההיסטורית, ועל יסוד החלטת עצרת האומות המאוחדות, אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל. היא מדינת ישראל.
After he finished reading it, the declaration was adopted unanimously. Hatikva was sung again, and Ben Gurion declared the state is established. In 30 minutes, the most momentous event in modern Jewish history was over. Within hours, the United States had recognized the new provisional government, and by dawn, surrounding Arab armies were attacking. On that day, the Israeli army consisted of 30,000 troops with no armor or other heavy equipment. Its air force was but a few Piper Cubs. Though all this would change in the coming weeks, in those first days of the war, the regular Arab armies held an overwhelming advantage in terms of men and material. The Arab armies invaded on all fronts. In the north, the Lebanese army seized the border crossing of Malkiah. The Syrians attacked in the area around the Sea of Galilee and advanced on Kibbutz Degania, where they were turned back. The Iraqis attacked across the Jordan River near the town of Beisyan, but were forced to retreat. They then moved their troops into Samaria, where they took up defensive positions. The most dangerous advance was that of the Egyptians. That army divided itself into two columns. One headed into the Negev desert and up through the Hebron hills towards Jerusalem. The brigade heading towards Jerusalem was stopped on the southern approaches to the city at Kibbutz Ramat Rachel. The second column advanced along the coastal road towards Tel Aviv. For 5 crucial days, the army was delayed by the defenders of Yad Mordechai. Next, they encountered Kibbutz Negba, which they eventually bypassed. The Egyptian forces continued on to where Ashdod is located today. An attack by a few Israeli Air Force planes convinced the Egyptians that the Israelis might be stronger than they thought, and they should stop and re-equip. On May 29th, the Israeli army launched a counteroffensive, which ended the Egyptian advance and the threat to Tel Aviv. One other army invaded, the Arab Legion of Jordan. The Arab Legion was the best equipped and trained Arab army. The Legion was commanded by experienced British officers. Fortunately for Israel, the Legion was relatively small, with 4,500 troops. It had been hoped that the Legion would stay out of the war completely. Secret negotiations had been taking place between the Jewish Agency and the Hashemite King Abdullah. But the king ultimately decided that not joining the Arab states would make his position in the Arab world untenable. On the day of Israel's independence was declared, the Arab Legion captured the Jewish settlements of the Etzion bloc, located between Hebron and Bethlehem. But the critical battle was for Jerusalem. On May 28th, the outnumbered and outgunned defenders of the ancient Jewish quarter surrendered. The western portion of the city, however, was successfully defended, but it remained under virtual siege. As a result, grave problem faced western Jerusalem's and Jewish inhabitants: hunger, thirst, and lack of arms. The road from the coastal plain to Jerusalem had been blocked since the beginning of the war, when the Arab region had occupied the Latrun fortress, having received it from the British. Latrun stood on an especially strategic elevation that overlooked the road to Jerusalem, at the point where the road began its initial ascent from the plain up through the mountains. Whoever controlled Latrun controlled the access to the Jerusalem road. Beginning on May 25th, repeated attempts were made by the Israelis to capture the fortress, only to end in failure. Fortunately, Colonel David Marcus, an American member of Machal, volunteers from overseas, helped uncover another narrow path to Jerusalem. Under his direction, the path was hastily widened into a crude road, just in time to relieve the siege of Jerusalem before the first truce went into effect. By the time the truce began, both sides were exhausted. Under the terms of the ceasefire, neither side was supposed to reinforce their forces. The Swedish Count Bernadette was appointed as a mediator, but as was expected, the ceasefire agreement was violated, and both sides substantially reinforced their positions. During the ceasefire, a ship full of arms purchased by the Irgun arrived off Israel's coast. When the Irgun insisted on retaining some of its arms for its own use, Ben Gurion ordered the army to seize the ship by force. Though the incident nearly caused a civil war, its ultimate effect was to make the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, the only legitimate arms-bearing force in Israel. The truce was soon to expire. Aware of this, the Egyptians launched another assault against Kibbutz Negev. The attack was repulsed, and during this period the IDF achieved minor gains in the Negev region. The major activity included the capture of the Arab cities of Ramla and Lud in the heart of the new nation. While earlier in the war, Israel's policy towards the local Arabs was a mixed one, in these two cities, Arab residents were encouraged to board trucks and were transported to the Legion lines. The IDF also captured Nazareth and the other Galilee areas that had been in Arab hands. During the second ceasefire, Count Bernadette proposed a settlement that would give the whole Galilee to Israel, while giving the Negev desert to the Arabs. Jerusalem was to be internationalized. Both the Arabs and the Israelis categorically rejected the Bernadette plan, and the unlucky mediator was assassinated in Jerusalem by Jewish extremists on September 17, 1948. The second ceasefire ended with an Israeli attack on Egyptian positions. By this junction, the Israelis were equipped with more modern aircraft and armored vehicles. Israeli forces quickly seized key Egyptian positions and captured the Negev city of Beersheba, and soon opened up the road to Eilat, the southern tip of the country. A large Egyptian army was surrounded, but refused to surrender. In the final stages of the war, Israeli troops advanced as far as El Arish in the Sinai Desert. At that point, the British threatened to intervene, especially after Israel shot down 5 Egyptian planes during a single dogfight. Under British pressure, Israeli troops pulled back, and a ceasefire came into effect. The war was over. Israel had been victorious against all odds, but the price was high. Over 6,000 Israelis lost their lives during the War of Independence, 1% of the population.